My name's David. I work at Mount Sinai, and I'm the director of what's called rehab innovation at the Mount Sinai Health System. So basically, it's my job to take technology that I think can be transformative in the lives of the people that we serve, and really, I think to borrow a theme from CGI, really ask ourselves what's working. There's a lot of research out there that might say, hey, this is the greatest thing ever and all patients should have this. But when we get it into the clinic, it doesn't work. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. It's not really changing lives or moving the needle the way we thought. So my job is to really push the limits of what's possible, run the research that needs to happen, and get it to my patients. My background, if you can work through my confused accent. I grew up in Western Australia, trained as a physical therapist out there. And when I was working there, I had kind of a very unusual clinical life. I worked in critical care settings with people who are recovering from stroke, spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury. But then I also worked with high-performance athletes. And there was something that really stuck with me when I was sort of working at the intersection of neuro rehab and high performance sports. It was that when you work with athletes, you're working with them 24/7. Every single day you're trying to keep them engaged and, like, let's get you working harder on this and let's make sure that you're not bored, and here's a nutritionist and here's a, sports scientist and all the rest of it. When you work with a stroke survivor, you say, well, we're going to do this for about 15 minutes. And we're going to hope that this movement comes back. And I'm going to just leave you doing this because I don't really want to watch that because that's kind of boring. And that's the level of care that a stroke survivor gets versus someone who's recovering, someone who's just trying to play a sport really well. And when I saw that disparity, I started to think, okay, well, I'm a grown up. I understand that we have a budget for sports and we have a budget for public health. And for some reason, they seem to be switched. But I wonder what we could do to get a similar level of engagement, a similar level of enjoyment into this community. And so I started working with gamified rehab. So I started to work with, again, I'm also dating myself. I started to work with Nintendo Wii, Microsoft Kinect, the OG Kinect when it first came out, then the Kinect 2. And we started to create gamification of rehab. So we would have stroke survivors who started to get, several thousand repetitions of movement, where initially they were getting 10 or 20 repetitions of movement. And, and so the outcomes were incredible. We showed that we could scale and deploy this to thousands of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people successfully. It's cost effective, things are working really well. And so this is the sort of thing that I do at Mount Sinai all the time. We get to work with all sorts of amazing technologies that range from tele-rehab systems that we can deploy to thousands of people, as well as brain-computer interfaces that we implant in people with severe disability and allow them to cognitively control digital devices. And so that's some of the work that I do working with people to overcome disability. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens when we step out of the medical model of disability and we start to talk about how we can create inclusion in sports. And that's going to start with, I guess we've just got one image here. So I'm going to tell just a quick story about meeting a young man by the name of Chris Scott. Chris was a gentleman that I had the honor of meeting in 2018. He was a skydive instructor who had completed over 900 jumps, and one day his chute didn't open correctly, and that led to a catastrophic injury. He miraculously survived the fall, but he fractured his C3 vertebrae, which meant that by the end of it, he had no movement of his arms or his legs. And his neuropsychologist, Angela Riccobono, came to me and said, listen, I'm kind of stuck on what to do with Chris, and he's having a hard time accepting where he is. Can he meet with you? And I said, well, of course, bring him to the lab and let's see what we can do. And I didn't know what I was going to tell Chris, but he came and I sat with him and I chatted and I said, okay, well, tell me what you like to do. And he said, well, I love gaming. And I had done a lot of adaptive esports work in my time with buttons and switches and things, but I'd never worked with someone quite as disabled as Chris. And I said, okay, well, show me how you game. And he sort of indicated with his head that I should rustle around in his bag, and I pulled out this device that's called a quad stick. And it's a sort of a sip and puff straw that you pop in your mouth, and you can move your head around, and it controls a joystick. And we sat down, and Chris proceeds to just kick my ass at NBA 2K, which is a basketball game on Xbox. And I mean, like, I'm not pandering to anyone. I am working my hardest, and this guy is just pantsing me, like very embarrassingly in front of my entire team, destroying me. And I immediately said to him, okay, well, we got to form an esports team. And we put the call out, and oh, there's Chris. and the Quad Gods were born, a team of esports athletes that are entirely made up of quadriplegics. These folks started getting out there into the gaming world and were winning competitions that were run by non-disabled people, for non-disabled people. And now as you can see, they have their own full-length feature that's on Max if anyone wants to watch. But one of the things that I think is just so important about the story of the Quad Gods is, if you were to watch this story and the only thing you take away from it is, oh my goodness, look at these people rising above adversity, I think you've missed the point. I think the main point is, look at what we've lost in terms of the personalities, in terms of the talent, in terms of the skill, in terms of the competitive killer instinct, by not creating inclusive environments where these people can compete, because they want to compete and they want to kick ass, and they do kick ass when we give them the technology. And so our story is by far, it is not done. What we're trying to do is just continue the inclusion. What we will be doing in 2025 is we now have, thanks to Logitech, an adaptive esports tournament that is across the whole world, where disabled athletes can compete for $40,000 of cash and prizes in esports competitions. And in 2025, we will be announcing the first ever implanted brain-computer interface heat, where athletes who have implanted brain implants can compete only using cognitive control. So that's the future of inclusion in esports. I'll leave it there, but thank you all for listening.